There's a very specific kind of tension that quietly settles into the room when you watch All in the Family long enough. And it doesn't come from anything explosive at first. It doesn't come from dramatic events or big plot twists. It comes from something much more familiar, something that almost feels ordinary, like the way one person in a conversation starts talking a little more than everyone else, a little louder, a little longer, and before you even realize it, the entire space begins to orbit around that voice. And in one particular kind of episode, that voice belongs entirely to Archie, not just because he wants to be heard, but because somewhere underneath it all, talking becomes the way he keeps himself steady. You can feel it right from the beginning, before anything even happens, before the first disagreement takes shape. There's already a sense that Archie is going to fill the room, not physically. But conversationally, he's already positioned himself in that chair like it's more than just a place to sit. It's a kind of anchor, a place where he can speak from, where he can hold control over the tone, over the pace, over what matters and what doesn't. Moves around softly, as she always does, never interrupting, never trying to claim space for herself in the same way, but always present, always attentive, like she understands something about the room that nobody else fully acknowledges. And Gloria is there, alert in a different way, watching, sensing, knowing how quickly things can shift even when they seem calm. Mike sits with that quiet readiness, not looking for an argument, but never stepping away from one either, especially when something is said that he can't let pass, and that's where everything begins. Archie starts talking, not reacting, not responding, just talking. And it's not just what he says, it's how he says it, the way his voice carries through the room, the way he doesn't pause long enough for anyone else to fully step in, the way his statements feel less like invitations to discuss and more like declarations that are meant to stand on their own. At first, it almost feels harmless. Just a man speaking his mind. Just a conversation, starting the way conversations do. But then something subtle happens. Mike tries to respond, not interrupting aggressively, not pushing too hard, just offering a different perspective, a different angle, something that shifts the direction even slightly. And Archie doesn't really engage with it. He talks over it, or around it, or past it. And that's when you start to see the pattern. Because this isn't just about dominating the conversation for the sake of winning. It's something deeper, something quieter, something tied to the way Archie experiences the world. And the more you watch, the more it feels like talking isn't just communication for him, it's protection. It's how he holds things together. It's how he keeps uncertainty at a distance. Every time Mike introduces a new idea, every time Gloria tries to add something, every time gently redirects, Archie responds by filling the space again, by extending his point, by reinforcing what he's already said, not necessarily because he's ignoring them, but because stopping, really stopping, might mean having to sit with something he doesn't fully control. And that's where the episode begins to take shape. Not as a series of events, not as a traditional story with rising action and resolution, but as a sustained moment, A long conversation where one voice keeps returning to the center, not allowing silence, not allowing the kind of pause where reflection might happen. And what makes this so compelling is how everyone else reacts to that. Mike doesn't back down, but he adjusts. He finds ways to insert his perspective into the flow, sometimes waiting for a gap, sometimes creating one, but always pushing against the idea that one voice should dominate completely. Gloria becomes more visibly frustrated as it continues, because she recognizes the pattern, she knows where it leads, she's seen it before, and her attempts to intervene come from a place of wanting to break that cycle, even if just for a moment. Although does something different. She doesn't try to overpower Archie's voice. She softens it, or at least she tries to. She listens, she responds with kindness. She introduces small moments of calm, little pauses that don't challenge directly but create space in a different way. And sometimes those moments land. Sometimes Archie slows down for a second. Sometimes the tone shifts just enough to feel like things might settle. But then the talking starts again, because the need underneath it hasn't gone away. And that's what makes the entire episode feel so real, so grounded in something that goes beyond just the characters. Because it's not hard to recognize that behavior, that instinct to keep talking, to keep filling the space, to avoid the kind of silence where uncertainty might creep in. Archie's worldview plays a huge role in this, of course, because it's built on a sense of stability, of things being a certain way, of roles being clear and defined. And when that worldview is challenged, even gently, it creates a kind of discomfort that doesn't always show up as fear, but often shows up as control. Talking becomes control. Talking becomes a way to reassert what feels stable. And Mike's presence challenges that constantly, not just through disagreement, but through the simple act of refusing to let the conversation stay one-sided, of insisting that other perspectives exist and deserve to be heard. And that insistence creates friction. Not explosive friction, but sustained, steady tension that builds as the episode continues. Because the more Mike tries to engage, the more Archie talks. The more Gloria reacts, the more Archie talks. The more tries to soften things, the more Archie fills the space again, not necessarily louder, not necessarily angrier, but more persistently. And that persistence becomes the defining feature of the episode. It's not about what they're arguing anymore. It's about how they're communicating. Or not communicating. And that's where the show reveals just how groundbreaking it really was. Because it doesn't step in to fix this dynamic. It doesn't guide the characters toward a moment where Archie suddenly listens, or where Mike suddenly backs off. It lets the pattern play out in full. It lets the audience sit with it, feel it, recognize it. The living room setting makes this even more intense, because there's nowhere to escape to, no change of scenery to break the rhythm. Just the same space, the same arrangement of people, the same conversational gravity pulling everything back to Archie's voice. And yet, despite that, or maybe because of it, there's humor. Not in the traditional sense of quick jokes or punchlines, but in the rhythm itself, in the way the repetition becomes almost absurd, in the way you start to anticipate the next response, the next extension of the same idea, the next moment where Archie continues instead of stopping. You laugh because it's familiar. You laugh because you've seen this before. But there's also discomfort, because you recognize what's underneath it, the need to feel secure, the resistance to being challenged, the way communication can turn into something else entirely when it's driven by that need. And the social context of the 1970s sits quietly in the background of all this, shaping the kinds of conversations they're having, shaping the stakes, shaping the intensity. Because this was a time when a lot of people were being asked, sometimes for the first time, to reconsider things they had always taken for granted. And for someone like Archie, that's not just an intellectual challenge. It's personal. It's destabilizing. And talking, continuously, insistently, becomes a way to hold onto something that feels like it might be slipping. By the time the episode reaches its later moments, there's no big turning point, no sudden realization that changes everything. There's just a gradual slowing, a kind of conversational fatigue that settles in, not because anything has been resolved, but because it can't keep going at the same pace forever. And in that slowing down, you get a glimpse of something quieter, something more reflective, a sense that underneath all the talking, there's something else there, something that hasn't been fully expressed, maybe because it can't be, not in that space, not in that dynamic. And that's what lingers. Not the specifics of the argument, not the individual points, but the feeling of it, the rhythm, the way one voice can fill a room not just to be heard, but to feel safe. And that's why it still resonates, why it still feels relevant, because that behavior, that instinct, hasn't disappeared. It shows up in different ways, in different conversations, in different contexts. But it's still there, that need to control the space through words, to avoid the vulnerability that comes with listening. Personally, I think that's what makes this kind of episode so powerful, because it doesn't judge, it doesn't simplify. It just shows, patiently, honestly, how people interact when they're trying to hold on to something, even if they don't fully understand what that something is. And as it ends, not with resolution, not with agreement, but with a kind of quiet pause, you're left not with answers, but with recognition, with the sense that you've seen something real, something that continues beyond the episode, beyond the living room, into the way people talk, and don't talk in their own lives. And maybe that's the most lasting thing about it, the way it stays with you, not because it told you what to think, but because it showed you how people sometimes use conversation not to connect, but to protect themselves.